When you say pound for pound greatest basketball player of all time, there's two names that are constantly being brought up. That's Isiah Thomas and Allen Iverson. Whether it be their polarizing personalities, their impact to the game of basketball despite their small stature, or the rivalry with MJ, the greatest basketball player of all time. It doesn't matter. They've drawn significant similarities throughout the career. But like I like to compare players, we have to go through three criteria, being accolades, skill set / talent, as well as dominance. So we're going to go through the three, see who's the greatest amongst between the two. And from there, I want to hear what y'all have to say. Now, before we get started with the accolades, I want to give you guys a backdrop or a perspective into how great these two players actually were. I think especially for Isiah Thomas, not enough credit is given to how great he was as an NBA player. Now, we all know about Allen Iverson and how he changed, the image of the NBA, the individualistic aspect of it. He brought that into the league, all right? From the cornrows, the tattoos, the hip hop culture, dressing, that was all Allen Iverson. He helped introduce that, and the NBA actually has taken that, refined it, and ran with it. You see a lot of the NBA personalities from Russell Westbrook, Donovan Mitchell, all the players you could think of, they all have to give credit to that individualistic style to Allen Iverson, all right? They were all copycats or offshoots of AI. And on top of that, you look, he went against the grain in terms of not wanting to be like Mike. He's coming from that era where everybody wanted to be like Mike, but AI just wanted to be AI. He wanted to be Allen Iverson. When everybody was running up with Nike or Adidas, he went with Reebok. He brought Reebok to the forefront in prominence in basketball. So hats off to Allen Iverson. And then as for Isiah Thomas, arguably one of the most underrated players of all time. He changed the paradigm, the idea that you needed a big, dominant big man to win a title. Isiah Thomas proved that to be wrong because he did not have a dominant big man, and he was able to win an NBA title. Not just win an NBA title, but change the fortune of a whole franchise. Isiah Thomas, standing at only 6'1", he was able to do that. So he may not have been culturally impactful as Allen Iverson, but in terms of impact on the way the game is played and how you win a title, definitely hats off to Isiah Thomas for that. He did that before Michael Jordan. He was the reason why Magic couldn't go three-peat. He was the reason why Bird didn't go back-to-back. And he was the reason why MJ couldn't even advance into the NBA Finals until 91. So hats off to Isiah Thomas. During that era in the 80s, you always heard about the Magic and Bird rivalry, but they never liked to give credit to the babyface assassin. They never liked to shine that light on him, on how he interrupted a lot of their greatness from even being greater. So I just want to give y'all a perspective as to how great these players were and how much they mean to the game of basketball. Not just the NBA, but the game of basketball worldwide. Now, for the accolades, starting off, you got to look at Allen Iverson, 7-time All-NBA selection, an 11-time All-Star, an NBA MVP award winner back in 2001, a 2-time All-Star Game MVP, 4-time scoring champion, and led the league in steals 3 different times. I mean, he has a Hall of Fame worthy career. AI, no doubt about it. I mean, when you look at what he was able to do in 2001 by leading the 76ers to the NBA Finals, I mean, he beat 2 teams better than his team en route in doing so, the Toronto Raptors and the Milwaukee Bucks. The Toronto Raptors led by Vince Carter, and the Milwaukee Bucks, they had Ray Allen, Glenn Robinson, everybody knows Big Dog, and Sam Cassell. I mean, those were pretty stacked teams, and Allen Iverson, just off of sheer willpower, was able to defeat those teams, went into the finals, and was facing a formidable Laker team who had been undefeated coming into the finals, undefeated throughout the playoffs, and he was able to land them their first blow, their first L he gave to them. That was AI. It was that David versus Goliath, and AI was able to do that. So that's definitely hats off to him. He had a very, very historic 2001 season. And for somebody of his size, 6 foot, 165 pounds, some say without shoes, he's probably like 5'10". What he was able to do, all that he was able to achieve, I mean, that's nothing short of greatness. Like, That was great. Unfortunately, he didn't have a gold medal. He didn't win an NBA title, but AI was still up there. I mean, what he was able to do still stacked up with the grades. Like I said, he made to the All-NBA team 7 times, 3 of which he was on the All-NBA first team. So he was regarded as one of the top 5 players in the league 3 times within his career. So hats off to AI. Now, when you look at Isiah Thomas accolades, he's a 12-time All-Star, a 5-time All-NBA selection, 3 of which he made it to the first team, a 2-time All-Star Game MVP, an NBA champion, and a Finals MVP award winner. And he led the league in assists back in 1985. So he too has a Hall of Fame worthy career based upon his accolades and what he was able to achieve at only 6'1". What he was able to do with those Pistons teams, taking them to 3 straight NBA finals, going back to back. So Isiah Thomas, another great player in terms of accolades. Unfortunately, he was unable to win an MVP award. We can go back and forth as to reasons why he didn't. Also, too, he was unable to win an Olympic gold medal, too, just like AI was unable to. He was ostracized out from being on that 92 Olympic team. Again, goes back to politics. I even say for the MVP award, it goes down to politics because I think the MVP award is a media favorite award, period, point blank. And during that time period, the media darlings were Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, and Michael Jordan. If you weren't one of those 3, you wasn't getting one. And Isiah Thomas was great during those times, but unfortunately, he was unable to get one. But to deciding as so close an accolades they were, both having awards that the other didn't win, it's really tough to say who I would go with. If I had to choose, definitely just stacking it up, we got to go with Isiah Thomas in terms of accolades. I mean, what are we playing for? We're playing for championships, all right? We're playing for the hardware. And in that regard, Isiah Thomas wins there. 2-time NBA champion and a Finals MVP award winner. That's something Allen Iverson will never have, unfortunately. Even as great as AI is, he will never have those 2 NBA titles that Isiah Thomas has. And that's what we play for, and it's all about the rings, baby. So in that regards, the nod goes over to Isiah Thomas. He wins in the accolades perspective. Now, in terms of skill and sheer talent, all right, now both of them are very close in terms of skill set and talent, like very close. With Allen Iverson, for starters, Allen Iverson's ability to pull up in the mid-range, his ball handling skills, both left and right hand, very dominant in both of them. His ability to get in through traffic and score at will, from the floaters, being able to absorb contact and still score. His craftiness in that regard, both inside and outside. AI is very crafty, and he's a very underrated passer. A lot of people get so enamored with his scoring ability, they forget that. I mean, this is somebody who's averaged over 6-7 assists a game in his career. So he's a very underrated passer because his scoring just happens to, overshadow that. And, his passes, are very crafty and very savvy in that regard. So people don't like to give him credit for that. And then athletically, like pound for pound, one of the greatest athletes of all time. I mean, this guy was a football player, All-American status football player back in high school, and as well as an All-American basketball player. So the talent is there athletically. There's no doubt about it. From his speed, his conditioning, the way he gets after it, that's all there for Allen Iverson. But there's one skill set I saved for last that I like to just bring up that people don't really understand how great of a skill that is his anticipation. The way he was able to play the passing lanes, get steals by anticipating. Now, he wasn't locking up players like Kobe Bryant, Paul Pierce, Tracy McGrady, Vince Carter, or if you look at point guards like Jason Kidd or Stephon Marbury, at smaller sizes, he was not locking up any of those players, but he was able to lead the league in steals 3 times. And that was just based off of his anticipation, be it his ability to play the passing lanes, helped him to win steals championships 3 different times in his career. I mean, that is great in and itself. That is a skill set right there. That's helping give extra possessions to his team, And it made the defense, not the defense, excuse me, it made the offense have to be very cautious on where they're passing the ball and having to be aware of where AI is at all times. Because for big men, if you kept that ball low, he's just going to come right from under you, steal that, and he's going to be out in transition up in the open floor. And AI in transition is very deadly from his speed and his craftiness, his ability to change speeds, change directions at a drop of a dime. AI was all that and more. And not to mention, that killer crossover, his handles, one of the best in NBA history. I mean, they had to change the rules because of AI's crossover. Think of it like this. Imagine James Harden's step back being so potent, and it's already potent, they had to outlaw it. That's what they did with AI's crossover. I mean, especially after he gave it to MJ, with that killer crossover. That right there alone, people were going all throughout the league. You heard Scottie Pippen talking about how he's palming the ball. However you want to argue it, his move was that deadly that they had to change the rules. So it just shows when you look at the skill set, AI was a very skillful player. The talent was there, all-rounder. Speed, from his speed, his conditioning, his strength, the way he was able to just get beat down and still absorb it and still be strong and still be able to play games. That is all talent right there, all sheer talent, and with the skill set of his anticipation and ball handling skills. And then when you look at Isiah Thomas, I had to grab everything I said with AI, Isiah Thomas also had. Isiah Thomas, he was a savvy player. He was a very cerebral type of player. His ability to get into the basket, get to the hole, and score at will. He was able to do that. And on top of that, he had a great mid-range pull-up. I don't think he was as ambidextrous as Allen Iverson was, but he still was, to say the least. He still has some ambidexterity to him. Also, too, when you look at, in terms of skill set, when you look at Isiah Thomas, his ability to turn off his scoring and turn on his playmaking skills in terms of passing the ball, the way he could turn that on and off was tremendous and still be impactful. If you needed Isiah Thomas to play off ball the whole game, he can play off ball the whole game and still kick your ass. If you needed him to be on ball and be a distributor, be a facilitator, he can do that all game and still bust your ass. That's how good, that's how skillful Isiah Thomas was. He played with the likes of Mark Aguirre, Adrian Dantley. These are players that are known for averaging close to 30, if not 30 or more points per game. And still was able to make those players great. Still, them scoring so much and them having to have the ball so much did not take away from Isiah Thomas. He was still able to find his own imprint onto the game in that regard. Something that Allen Iverson wasn't always so, gifted at doing so. Not to say that he couldn't, but it wasn't as potent as the way Isiah Thomas was doing that. I mean, so many times you see Joe Dumars controlling the ball where you think Joe Dumars is the point guard and it's Allen Iverson playing off ball. I mean, not Allen Iverson, excuse me, Isiah Thomas playing off ball and scoring. Or when Isiah Thomas needed to get Bill Laimbeer or Dennis Rodman going, he was able to do that because he was so much of a threat offensively and scoring the ball that you couldn't really, neglect him in that regard. You had to respect him at all times. So when you go single coverage on a Bill Laimbeer, he's able to tear you up, Or if you doubled Isiah, he was able to find the open guy, and then that person would get going, like a Dennis Rodman. So in the skill set, with everything said, both of them are very close. Isiah Thomas, for his time period, had great ball handling skills. He defensively, too, a very pugnacious type of dude, truculent. He will get up in his man, cause havoc on the defensive end. And now he played with the Bad Boy Pistons, a very good defensive team. So it's so close between the two. I mean, man, this is why we're having this. If I had to choose in terms of skill set and talent, remember talent, I would have to give the nod to Allen Iverson. Yes, I would have to give that nod to Allen Iverson. His ability, his anticipation to be able to play the passing lanes, his ability to score at will. And the reason why I gave it to Allen Iverson is, think about this. He played in the most defensive era in NBA history, the late 90s to the mid 2000s. All right, the most defensive era where teams were able to start going zone. They removed that illegal defense rule. Teams can go zone and pack it in, and AI was still able to average 30, still able to get to the cup at will, still be able to slice and dice through the defense. He got more penetration than anybody. Still able to pull up either side, left or right. You couldn't take anything away from him because he was going to be able to dominate offensively in that regard. So when it comes to the skill set, I have to give it to AI. I mean, they had to change the rules because he had a killer crossover. His ball handling skills were that potent that they had to change the rules for him. And, his mid-range game, when he got going, was unstoppable. Especially during the time period where you had the likes of Kobe Bryant, Vince Carter, Stephon Marbury, Tracy McGrady, Paul Pierce. I mean, these are great players offensively during that time period, all of which are bigger than him, yet AI was the more potent scorer in different times of their career. All right? I mean, he won the scoring title in 2005 in an era where Kobe Bryant was stepping in as the best player in the NBA, and AI was able to win a scoring title during that time period. All right? LeBron James was in the league, and he was able to still win a scoring title. Shaquille O'Neal, he was able to win a scoring title and an MVP on his watch, just based off of his skills and, his talent. At 6'1", the speed that he possessed, his killer first step, his leaping ability, very underrated. People don't realize that. And his strength, too, at only 165 pounds. So when it comes to the skills and the talent, I got to give that strictly to Allen Iverson. Hands down, he wins that regard. It's close, but now that I said all that, hands down, I got to give it to AI in that regard. Now, when it comes to dominance factor, all right, now AI, he was pretty dominant, in what he was able to bring to the game, with his skill set of being able to play the passing lanes and anticipate steals, his ability to score, so he was affecting the game on both ends of the floor. He was dominant on both ends of the floor. Same thing with Isiah Thomas. Isiah Thomas was a very potent offensive player. Now, when I say potent offensive player, I'm not just talking about his scoring, but his passing ability. I mean, if you needed a bucket, you go to Isiah Thomas. If you needed him to create something without scoring and just, get an assist for somebody else, Isiah Thomas was able to do that. But when you look at dominance, you want to look at how were they able to affect the game with their team as a whole. All right, if that makes any sense, how he was able, his skill set, his ability, how that was able to impact not only just for himself individually, but for the rest of his team. And Isiah Thomas' ability, like I said, to be able to turn off his scoring, or turn on his playmaking or his assisting, his ability to do that was so great. Like, to the point where when you think about it, if players like Chris Paul had that ability, he would be so much better. But Isiah Thomas had that already, all right? Isiah Thomas had that in his game. Not too many players in NBA history can say they averaged 20-plus points per game and 13 assists. Isiah Thomas did that, all right? Isiah Thomas did that. And in his earlier part of his career, he was a 20 and 10 type of player. 20 points, 10 assists. 20 points, 10 assists, and affecting the game in that regard. His scoring didn't dip until later on, like in the late 80s when he was winning the titles, because he realized, I got a player like Mark Aguirre, I got Joe Dumars, I got players like that they can score the basketball. Adrian Downey, they can score the basketball. So all I got to do is just let them rock out offensively. I'll just be able to be a threat. My presence on the floor is a threat enough that they know if they ease up off me, I'm going to bust their ass for 40. And you've seen that plenty of times in NBA history. Just watch some of his battles against the Lakers or the Bulls and how he was able to get off him. Or better yet, against the Celtics. And he played in an era in a very tough Eastern Conference during that 80s. I mean, you had the likes of the 76ers led by Moses Malone and Dr. J. You had the Celtics with Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, and Robert Parrish. Who else again? You had the Milwaukee Bucks, with Marcus Johnson. I mean, these teams in Sidney Moncrief, Marcus Johnson, Sidney Moncrief with those Bucks teams, sorry about that, forgive me. Sidney Moncrief was a great player. Look him up, an all-NBA caliber player, where him and Isiah Thomas were going back and forth on who's going to be on them all-NBA teams. So Isiah Thomas was able to dominate in a very tough conference, and not only just dominate, but then he went up against the best player of all time when he was coming into his own, and that's Michael Jordan, and he was able to dominate on him when Michael Jordan was in his prime. In the 90s, early 90s to say. So when you look at that, Isiah Thomas was a very, very, very dominant player. But The media didn't shed light on him because, like AI, they have that polarizing, behavior. A lot of the things that Isiah Thomas said rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. All right, you can do your research on that, on what was said on Larry Bird, and how his relationship fell off with Magic Johnson. The supposed blocking out of MJ during the All-Star weekend, all that stuff. Those are things that rub people the wrong way. That a lot of people didn't want to shed light on the greatness of Isiah Thomas and how dominant of a player he was. I mean, he was so dominant that he could mentally affect the game. All right, he was that cerebral to the point that Michael Jordan had to not only elevate himself physically, but he had to elevate his playing style mentally. When you talk about one of the greatest IQs in basketball history, you got to look at Isiah Thomas. All right, Isiah Thomas, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, they're up there. Even Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, and Michael Jordan. But when you talk about top tier, Isiah Thomas is up there in his understanding of the game of basketball. And I know I went on this big old spiel on Isiah Thomas, but Allen Iverson, he also had his dominance in his own way. Only reason why, I would not give him the edge over Isiah Thomas is this. Allen Iverson had to have teams tailor-made for him to fit his game. When you look at players like Jerry Stackhouse, who's a great player, they had to remove him from those 76er teams in order for AI to flourish the way he was able to flourish, all right? Teams had to be built around Allen Iverson, almost the same way teams have to be built around LeBron James. They need to fit their typical style of play. Players need to fit them. You're going to have a rim runner or a defender inside to be able to grab rebounds and clean stuff up for them. Players that be able to catch and shoot. Those are the players that Allen Iverson needs in order for him to be great, because he needs to have the ball in his hand in order to dominate. You don't necessarily see him dominate off ball the way Isiah Thomas was. Isiah Thomas, he's like a puzzle. You can take him and put him in any system you can think of, anywhere you can think of. Put him and he is going to affect the team positively. He is still going to put up his numbers dominantly. So when you talk about dominance, I have to give the edge to Isiah Thomas, all right? Isiah Thomas is the more dominant player than Allen Iverson. Now, most people who would choose Allen Iverson, those are the ones that want to go with heart or emotions. But if you're a logical dude and this is a thinking man's game, that your strongest muscle is your brain, you'll realize Isiah Thomas is the more dominant player, because a lot of the times Isiah Thomas beat a lot of his opponents, especially the Bulls. When you look at the Bulls, it wasn't because he was physically more dominant than them. They were young and more athletic, but he was mentally superior. He was on a whole nother level than they were, all right? So the mental game is important, very important in all aspects of sports. So the more dominant player has to go to Isiah Thomas. So when we look at this all together, from the accolades, the dominance, Isiah Thomas, and then the skills/talent, AI, 2 beats 1, the greater player between the two is none other than the babyface assassin, Isiah Thomas. All right, we put it all out there. It's very close. Both these players, very similar. Like I said, whether it be a polarizing behavior, AI, and this is practice, and how the league had to change the dress code, as well as change rules on the way it's played, all because of AI. The NBA also, too, going up against Isiah Thomas, barring him from joining the Dream Team. Basically made him come on stage and apologize to Larry Bird, doing all sorts of stuff to try to hold him back, not giving him the credit that was due, that he beat MJ, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson. He prevented them from being great. He prevented Larry Bird and Magic Johnson from being 3-peat champions. Larry Bird has never won a back-to-back title. Think about that. He's never won a back-to-back title. Magic Johnson has never 3-peated, and it's all due in part to who? Isiah Thomas. Michael Jordan couldn't even smell the finals because of Isiah Thomas. But credit goes to Michael Jordan. He ended up getting over that hump. But nonetheless, he had to struggle because of Isiah Thomas. So Isiah Thomas, one of the greatest players in NBA history. Some say top 10. You can argue that. But between him and AI, he's a dominant player. He's the better player, overall greatest. And I want to hear what y'all have to say about this. Like, comment, subscribe down below. I'm out.